The ideas that we've looked at so far, the Bertrand oligopoly equilibrium, where the firms end up cutting prices down to the competitive level, and the prisoner's dilemma situation, where again the firms find themselves competing against each other, are both approaches that suggest that cooperation is difficult and that intra-industry rivalry could be high. And obviously that would be bad for firms' profits. So what we need to consider at this point are possible strategies that firms could use to avoid this kind of outcome. So let's consider some possibilities. The key question is to ask whether some sort of cooperation isn't possible after all. It could take the form of collusion, which we'll look at later, or what is called tacit collusion. And by the word tacit, we mean that people don't talk to each other, but somehow they reach an understanding. Well, let's see how that might happen. The previous models that we've looked at, the Bertrand situation, the prisoner's dilemma, had one very unrealistic feature. And that feature was the fact that firms could just choose a price once. Well, that was particularly the case in the prisoner's dilemma situation, where the firm, in effect, just had to write down its price at the same time as the other firm, and neither firm knew what the other firm's price was going to be, but once they committed themselves, once the price was set, they couldn't change it. Now, of course, in real life, firms can change their prices, and as they change their prices, I will argue that they can kind of provide information to each other in a certain way. Well, the experiment, the thought experiment that we're going to carry out is one that's called an infinitely repeated game. So by the word game, we just mean a strategic situation in which those who are involved in it make choices about what their strategy is going to be. And in this case, they make choices repeatedly. And the word infinitely here, as in infinitely repeated, does not mean to suggest that firms live forever. Of course, that's not the case. But in this case, they are going to interact over some period of time where there's no clear ending to that interaction. So we're considering a situation in which you could imagine firms go out every day and they set prices and they see what happens. Now, to keep things simple, I'm going to assume that firms are going to be setting their prices at the same time so that neither firm knows what the other firm is going to choose, but after some period of time, each firm gets to make another choice. And time after time, the firms keep making choices and things happen. So, what might happen? Let's consider a possibility. The story that I want to tell is one in which cooperation evolves between the firms. It can evolve even though they don't necessarily talk to each other. The firms, after all, know that they don't want to get caught in the prisoner's dilemma. They know that cooperation is better than competition, but the problem is, how do you bring it about? In the case of the prisoner's dilemma, we saw that the logic seemed to lead each firm to a choice that was not going to maximize its profits. at least compared with an alternative situation in which both firms could choose a higher price. And yet the logic was that each firm trying to maximize its profits ended up with a low price, and they couldn't escape from that. Well, maybe there is a way to escape if this interaction between the firms goes on and on. Let's think of a story about how that could happen. I'm going to call one firm a price leader. In other words, that firm is going to perhaps lead the way out of the prisoner's dilemma. So we could imagine a situation in which one firm could choose the monopoly price, and it could see how the other firm is going to respond to that. The other firm might understand that that choice of the monopoly price by the price leader is really an invitation to raise its price as well. If both firms could raise their prices, then they could end up sharing monopoly profits. So let me just tell a story about how this could come about. Let's suppose that both firms find themselves in the prisoner's dilemma situation. Both of them are setting a low price. Well, that looks like a Nash equilibrium, but it's only really going to be an equilibrium if the circumstances that are assumed for the prisoner's dilemma actually hold. That is, the firms get to choose the price just once. But suppose that we have a price leader. Suppose that firm 1 is a brave firm and it decides it's going to take some losses in the short term and set a high price. We saw in the payoff matrix for the prisoner's dilemma that by setting a high price like that, firm 1 is going to lose a lot of customers to firm 2. But firm 1 is really telling firm 2 that it's willing to continue to set the monopoly price if firm 2 plays along. So suppose in the next time period, firm 2 follows firm 1 and sets a monopoly price. So firm 2 has in effect understood the signal that firm 1 sent in the previous period of time, and now they're both setting monopoly prices. In the next time period, they continue to do that. Well, that would be a happy situation for the firms, unhappy, of course, for their customers, but the firms are splitting monopoly profits. In effect, they're acting as a single firm, acting as a monopolist. However, suppose that that cooperation, for whatever reason, breaks down. Suppose that firm 2 gets greedy and decides to set a low price. Firm 1, thinking that they had an agreement, sets the monopoly price and is now going to lose customers to firm 2. How do you suppose that you would react if you were firm 1? Well, I think the natural response would be to punish firm 2 for violating your understanding. And so we would expect firm 1 to also charge a low price. After all, there's no point in charging the monopoly price and suffering losses if the other firm is going to charge the low price. Well, we know that firm 2's profits are going to decline once firm 1 sets a low price. So firm 2 is going to realize that perhaps it made a mistake that in the long term, if they could both charge monopoly prices, then both of them are going to be better off. And certainly firm 2 would be better off charging a high price, a monopoly price, rather than just keeping with these low prices. So what's really going on here, if we just think about the strategies that are being chosen by both firms, is that we've got what's called a tit-for-tat strategy. And that's just defined as choosing a strategy that the other firm, your rival, chose in the previous period of time. Let's just look at how that was working. So if we go back to the second time period, where firm 1 chose a monopoly price, firm 2 chose that same strategy in the next time period. Then, once that cooperation had evolved, then they each chose the monopoly price in the next time period, effectively just playing or choosing the strategy that their rival had chosen in the previous time period. Firm 1 was carrying on with that. Here in time period 5, it chose the monopoly price just like firm 2 had before. But now firm 2, in my story, deviated from that tit-for-tat strategy. It chose a different strategy, choosing the low price. Firm 1 stuck to the tit-for-tat strategy, now choosing the strategy that firm 2 had used in the previous time period. Well, firm 2 realized, of course, that it had been punished, and let's suppose, to make this story have a happy ending, that firm 2 is going to realize its mistake and offer to cooperate at this point. I'm going to suppose that this story has a happy ending where both firms end up choosing the monopoly price. A happy ending, at least for the firms. So it could be that once this kind of, I'll call it tacit collusion, tacit cooperation evolves, there's no reason really for it to break down, unless something happens to disturb the equilibrium, perhaps, say, the entry of a new firm or something like that. So, once again, what's going on is that the firms are playing a tit-for-tat strategy, and if they stick with that, experiments have shown that cooperation can evolve in this kind of situation and can remain stable. So just to summarize, if we go back to the earlier prisoner's dilemma story, what's happened with this infinitely repeated prisoner's dilemma game is that instead of ending up at this low price equilibrium, the firms have managed to find their way to a high price equilibrium, or what here I just call a monopoly price outcome. A key point is that this kind of outcome could occur without any kind of explicit collusion or discussion between the two firms. They don't have to meet, they don't have to make some agreement about prices, they just sort of signal to each other by the strategies that they choose. So in countries with competition laws where explicit collusion and agreements are illegal, this kind of tacit cooperation is actually perfectly legal and could happen quite frequently, at least in markets in which the two firms interact repeatedly and kind of get to know each other in a certain sense and can evolve this kind of understanding. Well, what I want to turn to in the next video are examples of other strategies in which firms can try to keep prices high and to avoid competition.